The previously mentioned Simon, who had informed about the money against his own country, slandered Onias, saying that it was he who had incited Helodarius, and had been the real cause of the misfortune. He dared to designate as a plotter against the government the man who was the benefactor of the city, the protector of his fellow countrymen, and a zealot for the laws. When his hatred progressed to such a degree that even murders were committed by one of Simon's approved agents, Onias recognized that the rivalry was serious and that Apollonius, the son of Menethius and governor of Coelesyria and Phoenicia, was intensifying the malice of Simon. So he betook himself to the king, not accusing his fellow citizens, but having in view the welfare, both public and private, of all the people. For he saw that without the king's attention, public affairs could not again reach a peaceful settlement, and that Simon would not stop his folly. When Seleucus died, and Antiochus, who was called Epiphanes, succeeded to the kingdom, Jason, the brother of Onias, obtained the high priesthood by corruption, promising the king, at an interview, 360 talents of silver, and from another source of revenue, 80 talents. In addition to this, he promised to pay 150 more if permission were given to establish by his authority a gymnasium and a body of youth for it, and to enroll the men of Jerusalem as citizens of Antioch. When the king assented, and Jason came to office, he at once shifted his countrymen over to the Greek way of life. He set aside the existing royal concessions to the Jews, secured through John the father of Eppolemus, who went on the mission to establish friendship and alliance with the Romans, and he destroyed the lawful ways of living and introduced new customs contrary to the law. For with alacrity he founded a gymnasium right under the citadel, and he induced the noblest of the young men to wear the Greek hat. There was such an extreme Hellenization and increase in the adoption of foreign ways because of the surpassing wickedness of Jason, who was ungodly and no high priest, that the priests were no longer intent upon their service at the altar. Despising the sanctuary and neglecting the sacrifices, they hastened to take part in the unlawful proceedings in the wrestling arena after the call to the discus, disdaining the honors prized by their fathers, and putting the highest value upon Greek forms of prestige. For this reason, heavy disaster overtook them, and those whose ways of living they admired and wished to imitate completely became their enemies and punished them. For it is no light thing to show irreverence to the divine laws, a fact which later events will make clear. When the quadrennial games were being held at Tyre, and the king was present, the vile Jason sent envoys, chosen as being Antiochian citizens from Jerusalem, to carry 300 silver drachmas for the sacrifice to Hercules. Those who carried the money, however, thought best not to use it for sacrifice, because that was inappropriate, but to expend it for another purpose. So this money was intended by the sender for the sacrifice to Hercules, but by the decision of its carriers it was applied to the construction of Teremes. When Apollonius, the son of Menesthius, was sent to Egypt for the coronation of Philometor as king, Antiochus learned that Philometor had become hostile to his government, and he took measures for his own security. Therefore, upon arriving at Joppa, he proceeded to Jerusalem. He was welcomed magnificently by Jason and the city, and ushered in with a blaze of torches and with shouts. Then he marched into Phoenicia. After a period of 3 years, Jason sent Menelaus, the brother of the previously mentioned Simon, to carry the money to the king and to complete the records of essential business. But he, when presented to the king, extolled him with an air of authority, and secured the high priesthood for himself, outbidding Jason by 300 talents of silver. After receiving the king's orders, he returned, possessing no qualification for the high priesthood, but having the hot temper of a cruel tyrant and the rage of a savage wild beast. So Jason, who after supplanting his own brother was supplanted by another man, was driven as a fugitive into the land of Ammon. And Menelaus held the office, but he did not pay regularly any of the money promised to the king. When Sostratus, the captain of the citadel, kept requesting payment for the collection of the revenue was his responsibility, the two of them were summoned by the king on account of this issue. Menelaus left his own brother Lysimachus as deputy in the high priesthood, while Sostratus left Crates, the commander of the Cyprian troops. While such was the state of affairs, it happened that the people of Tarsus and of Malis revolted because their cities had been given as a present to Antiochus, the city's concubine. So the king went hastily to settle the trouble, leaving Andronicus, a man of high rank, to act as his deputy. But Menelaus, thinking he had obtained a suitable opportunity, stole some of the gold vessels of the temple and gave them to Andronicus. Other vessels, as it happened, he had sold to Tyre and the neighboring cities. When Onias became fully aware of these acts, he publicly exposed them, having first withdrawn to a place of sanctuary at Daphne near Antioch. Therefore Menelaus, taking Andronicus aside, urged him to kill Onias. Andronicus came to Onias, and restoring to treachery, offered him sworn pledges, and gave him his right hand, and in spite of his suspicion, persuaded Onias to come out from the place of sanctuary. Then, with no regard for justice, he immediately put him out of the way. For this reason, not only Jews, but many also of other nations, were grieved and displeased at the unjust murder of the man. When the king returned from the region of Cilicia, the Jews in the city appealed to him with regard to the unreasonable murder of Onias, and the Greeks shared their hatred of the crime. Therefore Antiochus was grieved at heart and filled with pity, and wept because of the moderation and good conduct of the deceased. And inflamed with anger, he immediately stripped off the purple robe from Andronicus, tore off his garments, and led him about the whole city to that very place where he had committed the outrage against Onias. And there he dispatched the bloodthirsty fellow. The Lord thus repaid him with the punishment he deserved. When many acts of sacrilege had been committed in the city by Lysicamus with the connivance of Malachias, and when report of them had spread abroad, the populace gathered against Lysicamus, because many of the gold vessels had already been stolen. And since the crowds were becoming aroused and filled with anger, Lysicamus armed about 3,000 men and launched an unjust attack, under the leadership of a certain Aranus, a man advanced in years and no less advanced in folly. But when the Jews became aware of Lysicamus's attack, some picked up stones, some blocks of wood, and others took handfuls of the ashes that were lying about, and threw them in wild confusion at Lysicamus and his men. As a result, they wounded many of them and killed some, and put them all to flight, and the temple robber himself they killed close by the treasury. Charges were brought against Menelaus about the incident. When the king came to Tyre, 3 men sent by the Senate presented the case before him, but Menelaus, already as good as beaten, promised a substantial bribe to Ptolemy, son of Dorymaeus, to win over the king. Therefore Ptolemy, taking the king aside into a colonnade as if for refreshment, induced the king to change his mind. Menelaus, the cause of all the evil, he acquitted of the charges against him, while he sentenced to death those unfortunate men who would have been freed uncondemned if they had pleaded even before Scythians. And so those who had spoken for the city and the villages and the holy vessels quickly suffered the unjust penalty. Therefore even the Tyrians, showing their hatred of the crime, provided magnificently for their funeral. But Menelaus, because of the cupidity of those in power, remained in office, growing in wickedness, having become the chief plotter against his fellow citizens. I will give thanks to you, O Lord and King. I will praise you as God my Savior. I give thanks to your name, for you have been my protector and helper, and have delivered my body from destruction, and from the snare of a slanderous tongue, from lips that utter lies. Before those who stood by, you were my helper and delivered me. in the greatness of your mercy and of your name. From the gnashings of teeth about to devour me, from the hand of those who sought my life, from the many afflictions that I endured, from choking fire on every side, and from the midst of fire which I did not kindle, from the depths of the belly of Hades, from an unclean tongue and lying words, the slander of an unrighteous tongue to the king. My soul drew near to death, and my life was very near to Hades beneath. They surrounded me on every side, and there was no one to help me. I looked for the assistance of men, and there was none. Then I remembered your mercy, O Lord, and your work from of old, that you deliver those who wait for you, and save them from the hand of their enemies. And I sent up my supplication from the earth, and prayed for deliverance from death. I appealed to the Lord, the Father of my Lord, not to forsake me in the days of affliction, at the time when there is no help against the proud. I will praise your name continually, and will sing praise with thanksgiving. My prayer was heard, for you saved me from destruction and rescued me from an evil plight. Therefore I will give thanks to you and praise you, and I will bless the name of the Lord. While I was still young, before I went on my travels, I sought wisdom openly in my prayer. Before the temple I asked for her, and I will search for her to the last. From blossom to ripening grape, my heart delighted in her. My foot entered upon the straight path. From my youth I followed her steps. I inclined my ear a little and received her, and I found for myself much instruction. I made progress therein. To him who gives wisdom I will give glory. For I resolved to live according to wisdom, and I was zealous for the good, and I shall never be put to shame. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000, who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven, like the sound of many waters, and like the sound of loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps. And they sing a new song before the throne and before the 4 living creatures, and before the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are chaste. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been redeemed from mankind as first fruits for God and the Lamb. And in their mouth no lie was found, for they are spotless. Then I saw another angel flying in mid-heaven, with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on earth, to every nation and tribe and tongue and people. And he said with a loud voice, Fear God and give him glory, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea and the fountains of water. Another angel, a second, followed, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who made all nations drink the wine of her impure passion. And another angel, a third, followed them, saying, with a loud voice, If anyone worships the beast and its image, and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also shall drink the wine of God's wrath, poured unmixed into the cup of his anger, and he shall be tormented with the fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest, day or night, these worshippers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. Here is a call for the endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and in the faith of Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, Write this, Blessed are the dead who from now on die in the Lord. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them. Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and seated on the cloud one like a son of man, with a golden crown on his head, and a sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat upon the cloud, Put in your sickle, and reap, for the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe. So he who sat upon the cloud swung his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. And another angel came out of the temple of heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Then another angel came out from the altar, the angel who has power over fire, And he called with a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, "Put in your sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe." So the angel swung his sickle on the earth, and gathered the vintage of the earth, and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood followed from the winepress, as high as a horse's bridle, for 1,600 stadia. Then I saw another sign in heaven, great and wonderful, 7 angels with 7 plagues, which are the last, for with them the wrath of God is ended. And I saw what appeared to be a sea of glass mingled with fire, and those who had conquered the beast and its image, and the number of its name, standing beside the sea of glass, with harps of God in their hands. And they sing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying, "Great and wonderful are your deeds, O Lord God the Almighty. Just and true are your ways, O King of the ages. Who shall not fear and glorify your name, O Lord? For you alone are holy. All nations shall come and worship you, for your judgments have been revealed." After this I looked, and the temple of the tent of witnesses in heaven was opened. And out of the temple came the 7 angels with the 7 plagues, robed in pure bright linen, and with golden sashes across their chests. And one of the 4 living creatures gave the 7 angels 7 golden bowls, full of the wrath of God, who lives forever and ever. And the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power. And no one could enter the temple until the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were ended. Sirach 50 show the liturgical worship of Israel, gathered together in the temple. Liturgy and its corporate worship models for individuals the piety they are to personalize in their own lives. In Sirach 51, our author shows how liturgy is to move us to a deeply personal spirituality. He begins with a personal account of praise and thanksgiving for what God has done in his life. In the liturgy, we give thanks and praise for what God has done for Israel and his people. And in our personal prayer, we give thanks and praise for what he has done for us individually. The movement is from Israel to the individual, from liturgy to personal prayer. Sirach's prayer follows a pattern that he personalizes. Psalms of thanksgiving have a threefold pattern. Beginning with praise, they move to plight, and then end in praise and thanksgiving. We each have our own reasons for gratitude, our own story of plight that moves to praise. The entire book of Sirach has been tracing the branches of knowledge down to their deep roots, to wisdom. Here at the end of the book, we are shown that ultimate wisdom is realized when we recognize the reasons in our own lives for gratitude. Do you agree with Sirach that the measure of our wisdom is encompassed by the degree of our gratitude and the depth of our patterns of praise?